You have 10 seconds to step outside, old man, the security guard growled, hand inching toward his holstered weapon. But Samuel DeWitt didn't move. Instead, he calmly opened his satchel and pulled out a brittle, yellowed ledger. The room fell into stunned silence as he declared, "This bank belongs to me, and I'm here to take back what was stolen." The late morning sun glinted off the glass-paneled entrance of Rich Hill Financial Center, casting a golden reflection across the glossy marble steps. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished stone floors, mahogany counters, and the muted hum of wealth. It was the kind of place where tailored suits outnumbered smiles and where whispers were measured and money spoke first. A man stepped through the grand revolving doors, and in that instant, the rhythm of the bank's routine faltered, if only slightly. Samuel DeWitt, age 76, walked with deliberate steps across the bank's pristine lobby. His shoes were scuffed, soles worn uneven from time. His long coat was patched at the sleeves and dulled by decades of weather, and on his shoulder hung a frayed leather satchel, faded to a dusty brown with brass buckles long dulled. Patrons turned their heads. A few chuckled quietly, others leaned toward their companions with eyebrows raised. A security camera tilted suddenly. An older white woman near the VIP line pulled her handbag closer and offered Samuel a look that straddled both fear and disdain. Behind the front desk, a sharply dressed teller glanced up from her monitor, blinked twice, and leaned toward a colleague. "Did he just walk in here?" she whispered. "Must have wandered in from outside." The colleague scoffed. "Probably thinks we're a public library." Samuel said nothing. He moved slowly but surely, each step tapping softly against the marble as he approached the center of the lobby. The grandeur of the place didn't faze him. He didn't look left or right. His eyes, still sharp, still full of quiet fire, remained fixed on the front counter. Then he stopped. Without raising his voice, he spoke clearly, his tone as steady as the stone beneath his feet. "This bank belongs to me." The words dropped like a lead weight into the room. For a beat, no one responded. Then, laughter. It began as a snicker from one of the tellers, then bubbled up from the waiting lounge where two suited men exchanged a mocking look. A woman standing by the deposit counter burst into open giggles. "This is priceless," someone muttered. "Is he serious?" Must have hit his head. A few smartphones were quietly raised. And then came the voice of authority, cold, clipped, and completely devoid of compassion. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside right now." Kyle Brennan, the head of security, mid-40s, stood 6'3" in polished boots and a pressed Navy uniform. He had the solid build of a man used to getting his way and the narrowed eyes of someone who had judged Samuel the second he laid eyes on him. Samuel turned slowly, facing Kyle. "Is there a reason I'm being asked to leave, officer?" "Yeah," Kyle sneered. "Because this isn't a shelter. And it sure as hell ain't yours." He took a step forward, hand hovering near his belt where a retractable baton sat holstered. "Now let's not make a scene." Samuel looked around slowly. The room had gone tense again, the kind of hush that follows a thunderclap. Then, without flinching, he unhooked the satchel from his shoulder and placed it gently on the marble floor. His fingers, worn with age but still steady, undid the brass clasp and slowly peeled the flap open. He reached inside. Laughter turned to murmurs. A few stepped back. Kyle's hand moved an inch closer to his baton. Samuel pulled out a bundle of aged currency, yellowed, crisp, bearing the Rich Hill crest last used in the 1940s. Then, with deliberate grace, he lifted a weathered brown ledger, bound in thick leather, the words Rich Hill Bank, EST 1947 embossed faintly on the cover. He opened to a page near the front. The signature read, "Samuel T. DeWitt, founding partner." He turned the page. Below it, Harlan Greaves, managing director, dated July 3, 1947. The laughter died. Kyle blinked. "Where'd you get that?" he demanded, voice suddenly less certain. "This," Samuel said, lifting the ledger gently into the air, "is proof of ownership. This is the founding document of Rich Hill Bank." I signed it myself, the year I built this place with my own hands and the sweat of my youth. For a moment, no one knew what to say. Then a scoff rang out from behind the counter. "This is crazy," Olivia Stein said, the bank's assistant manager, stepping forward in 4-inch heels and a pantsuit that looked hand-stitched in Milan. "You think showing up in rags with an old notebook is going to convince us you own this building? Sir, you need to leave before we call Charleston PD." Samuel didn't even blink. "Your name?" he asked softly. She raised an eyebrow. "Olivia Stein." "And I have no time for Miss Stein," Samuel interrupted, voice like smooth granite. "Before the Whitmore family took this building and renamed the institution Ridge Hill Financial Center, it was Ridge Hill Savings and Credit Union. A black-owned bank. My bank. I built it from the ground up in 1947 with my partner Harlan Greaves. And 2 years later, he, along with Everett Whitmore and the Charleston Land Trust, took it from me." Kyle frowned, suddenly looking between Samuel and Olivia, uneasy for the first time. "He's bluffing," Olivia said, but her voice had lost its edge. "This is some kind of scam." Samuel leaned down and slowly laid the ledger flat on the floor. Then he reached back into his satchel and pulled out a faded envelope sealed in wax. Inside were deeds, contracts, and hand-signed letters, the originals. Yellowed but unmistakable. "These are the unaltered contracts from 1947 to 1950, Samuel said. "They show no legal transfer of ownership. Because there wasn't one. They forged my signature, erased my name from city records, and had me declared mentally unfit, all because a black man owning a bank was unthinkable to the people who ran this city." Silence took hold once more. Olivia stood frozen, mouth slightly open. Kyle took half a step back. A woman near the corner, young, olive-skinned, wearing a Ridge Hill name tag, slowly approached the display. Her name badge read, Madison Reyes. She bent down, studied the currency, and picked up one of the bills with trembling hands. "I've only ever seen these in the company archives," she whispered. "No one's had one outside of our museum vault in decades." Then, in a gesture that silenced the room, she gently placed the bill back down in front of Samuel and nodded. "Sir," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you." Samuel looked at her, his eyes kind but unyielding. "Thank you, Ms. Reyes." The ripple had begun. Behind Madison, 2 more employees stepped forward. One placed a vintage checkbook beside the ledger. Another laid a Ridge Hill-branded bond certificate next to the envelope. Olivia looked around, her certainty crumbling. Kyle said nothing, but the baton slowly slid back into its holster. Samuel stood in the center of Ridge Hill's great lobby, surrounded by echoes of the past and glimmers of vindication. And as he gently closed the ledger, the words he spoke next cut through the marble silence like a judge's gavel. "For 76 years, you tried to bury the truth beneath luxury, lies, and polished glass. But I never forgot. And now, neither will you. For 76 years, you tried to bury the truth beneath luxury, lies, and polished glass. But I never forgot. And now, neither will you." Samuel's voice echoed through the vaulted lobby like a stone cast into still water. The stunned silence that followed was no longer one of mockery, it was disbelief ripening into unease. In the stillness, no one moved. No one dared to interrupt the moment, not even Olivia Stein, whose once defiant posture had softened into uncertainty. Kyle Brennan's arms hung at his sides now, the tension in his frame beginning to give way to a strange discomfort, like a man standing on the edge of something he couldn't yet see. The vintage banknotes still lay like forgotten artifacts on the floor in front of Samuel, their yellowed edges curling upward as if reaching toward the light of justice that had finally begun to seep in. Then, Olivia found her voice again, though it was brittle, stretched thin with doubt. These documents could be anything," she stammered, stepping forward in heels that suddenly didn't feel as tall. "Anyone can print out fake ledgers. You can buy old banknotes on the internet. It doesn't prove ownership." Samuel didn't flinch. He slowly reached back into the satchel and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with wax, its edges worn but intact. Breaking the seal, he drew out a set of crisp, preserved documents, contracts, letters, and notarized agreements, each bearing his full name, a date, and the unmistakable penmanship of a different era. This is the original deed transfer from 1947. Signed by me. Notarized by the city clerk. Here is the partnership agreement with Harlan Greaves. And this, he held up a page with an inkstamp nearly faded away, is the memorandum filed before the first deposit was made into Rich Hill Savings and Credit Union. Olivia opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Across the lobby, Kyle took a slow step backward, his expression no longer defensive but wary, as if realizing he had underestimated the man before him. Then, the crowd that had silently gathered throughout the lobby began to murmur. A few guests looked around awkwardly, unsure if they should stay. Others leaned closer, squinting to read the headlines on the aged documents. Behind the teller line, a door clicked open. Raymond Hart, the branch manager, stepped into view. Late 50s, meticulously dressed, with a presence that normally quieted rooms. He had been watching for several minutes, observing the escalating tension from his office above. Now, the weight of the situation could no longer be left to subordinates. What exactly is going on here? Raymond's voice was calm, but his tone demanded answers. Olivia turned toward him, her composure cracking. Sir, we've had a situation. This man, he claims to be the original founder of Rich Hill Bank. He walked in with old documents and I asked to be heard, Samuel said gently, raising his eyes to meet Raymond's. Not to be mocked. Not to be dismissed. Raymond glanced at the items laid out on the floor, the old ledger, the currency, the envelope of contracts. Then he looked into Samuel's eyes and saw something there that unsettled him more than anything else in the room, unwavering truth. Mr. DeWitt, is it? Samuel Theodore DeWitt, he answered. Founder and first chairman of Rich Hill Savings and Credit Union, established March 10, 1947. May I? Raymond gestured toward the documents. Samuel nodded and handed them over. As Raymond carefully inspected each page, flipping slowly through the brittle sheets, Olivia stepped closer, trying to recover her composure. Sir, I still think we should call legal. Hold on, Raymond said, eyes still on the pages. These aren't photocopies. He tapped a contract. This signature, it's in fountain pen. The ink's feathered into the paper. This is 70-year-old parchment. The room seemed to grow colder, quieter. Raymond looked up at Samuel again, now with a different expression. Not doubt. Not disbelief. But dawning respect. Mr. DeWitt, what you're presenting here, if verified, could be a matter of serious consequence. It already is, Samuel said simply. It has been for over half a century. Before anyone could speak again, a soft voice broke the silence. Mr. DeWitt? Madison Reyes, the young Latina teller, stepped forward, holding something in her hand. I found this in our bank's archive when I was training. It was buried in a box marked Historical Artifacts, No Access. She extended a single, framed black and white photo toward Samuel. It was faded, but the image was clear, two men standing in front of an unfinished bank building. One was white, one was black. The man on the right was smiling broadly, shaking the other man's hand. That's me, Samuel said quietly. That's the day we opened Rich Hill's doors for the first time. Olivia blinked in disbelief. Where did that even come from? We weren't supposed to open it, Madison replied. But I was curious. It looked erased. She paused, then added, like someone wanted to make sure no one saw it again. Slowly, she stepped up to the table where the ledger lay and placed the photo beside it. Then, in a gesture that felt more ceremonial than anything she'd ever done in the bank, she removed an old Rich Hill-issued bill from her drawer, one of the collector bills the bank kept for legacy branding, and laid it next to the documents. I believe you, she whispered. And that broke the silence. One by one, tellers began stepping forward. Some brought old items from the back. Others retrieved vintage promotional material they'd seen but never questioned. One elderly clerk, Mr. Hamlin, who had been with the bank for over 30 years, simply approached Samuel and said, "We were told you left the country in 1950. That you abandoned the bank." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No. I was forced out. My partner Harlan sold my shares behind my back. Claimed I was mentally unfit. The court never let me speak. The Whitmores signed the papers, and just like that, everything was gone." Kyle Brennan, who had been silently watching from near the doorway, finally spoke, but his voice was low. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. Samuel looked at him, not with contempt, but with calm dignity. "I know. So were the men who kept the doors shut for people like me in 1947. That doesn't make it right." Olivia, now pale, turned to Raymond. "Sir, this is way beyond our authority." "I agree," Raymond said. He turned to Samuel and nodded with quiet resolve. "Mr. DeWitt, I'd like to formally invite you to present this evidence before our board of directors. It won't be easy, but they need to hear it from you. We've kept a version of this bank's history that may not be the whole truth. It's time to correct that." Samuel nodded, his voice quiet. "That's all I've ever wanted." The lobby had shifted. What had begun as laughter, then discomfort, had now settled into something else entirely, reverence. People who had scoffed at Samuel now watched him with wide eyes and tight throats. They weren't just looking at a man in old clothes. They were looking at a chapter of history that had never been told, one that was finally demanding its rightful place in the record. And as Samuel carefully packed up the ledger, the bills, and the contracts back into his worn leather satchel, the air in Ridge Hill Financial Center was no longer filled with laughter or mockery, but with the unmistakable feeling that the walls themselves were finally beginning to listen. The air inside Ridge Hill Financial Center felt different now, not just quieter, but heavier, as though truth itself had pulled up a seat and refused to be ignored. As Samuel DeWitt gently closed the weathered satchel and gathered the artifacts of his stolen legacy, Raymond Hart stood by silently, still holding the original contract in both hands, his eyes scanning the faded ink as if each line carried the weight of a forgotten century. Around them, a respectful hush lingered in place of earlier mockery. Employees who once whispered and doubted now watched with reverence. Even Olivia Stein, visibly shaken, had taken a cautious step back, her arms crossed not in defiance but in self-protection, as if trying to shield herself from the implications unraveling around her. Raymond exhaled slowly and turned to Samuel. "Mr. DeWitt, if you'll allow me, I'd like to personally walk this to our board of directors. This can't be buried anymore." Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "They've hidden this truth for 50 years. You'll be risking your position." "I'd be risking a lot more by staying silent," Raymond replied. "Some things matter more than job titles." He turned to Olivia. "Get legal. Get compliance. Get the archivist and tell them to prepare for an audit. Now." Olivia hesitated, her pride visibly warring with the storm brewing behind her eyes. "Yes, sir," she finally said, her voice tight. The next 48 hours moved with the tension of a courtroom drama. Raymond personally brought Samuel's documents before the Ridge Hill Executive Board, presenting the evidence in a conference room filled with mahogany walls, oil portraits of past presidents, and a table that hadn't seen disruption in decades. But disruption had arrived, and it had a name. The room initially received Samuel's claims with stiff politeness and measured skepticism. Some board members exchanged smirks. Others checked their watches. But the moment Raymond laid out the notarized deeds, the forged signatures, and the 1947 ledger, all matching bank records long thought lost, something shifted. They couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The name Samuel T. DeWitt wasn't just a signature on fading paper. It was a missing cornerstone. A founding figure written out of Ridge Hill's narrative like an inconvenient footnote. As Raymond described the day Samuel had walked into the branch and calmly declared ownership, some scoffed. But when Madison Reyes testified, presenting the buried photograph, the archived artifacts, and her personal knowledge of the bank's cover-up, the tone of the boardroom changed from dismissal to alarm. Then came the press. What began as whispers online, snippets from a cell phone video showing an elderly black man confronting a bank's legacy, exploded across social media. By the third day, #DeWittTruth trended nationally. Local Charleston papers ran headlines like "Buried Legacy at Rich Hill" and "Founder Erased, a Fight for Justice." National networks picked it up. "Meet the man who founded a bank and was erased from its history," one anchor declared during a primetime feature. Samuel, once invisible, became a name on every news feed and timeline. Crowds began gathering outside Rich Hill's downtown headquarters. Some came in protest. Others came in solidarity. Signs read "Honor the Founder," "Truth has no expiration date," and "Black history is American history." And still, through the mounting pressure, the Whitmore family, who had controlled the bank for generations, remained silent. But silence would not shield them for long. By the end of the week, internal legal memos leaked, documents confirming that the Whitmores had known about Samuel's claims for years but dismissed them as unsubstantiated. Now, the tide had turned. On the morning of the 9th day, a formal hearing was held at Rich Hill's main hall. Journalists packed the back rows. The gallery was filled with employees, past presidents, local leaders, and dozens of curious onlookers who simply wanted to witness history finally being told. Samuel stood at the front, flanked by Raymond Hart and his legal counsel. His posture was steady, proud. His voice, though softer than the booming speakers overhead, carried the kind of weight that no microphone could amplify. "I was 23 when I founded Rich Hill Savings and Credit Union. I built it because men like me had nowhere to go. No banks would lend to us. No institutions would recognize our dreams. So I created one. With my own hands. With the help of a friend. And when it began to grow, when it threatened the comfort of men in high places, I was betrayed, silenced, and erased." His gaze swept the crowd. "But I did not forget. And now, neither will you." The room fell into a silence that no one dared to break. Even the board, once dismissive, now looked down at their papers like schoolchildren caught in a lie. Olivia Stein, seated near the back, stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Kyle Brennan stood near the door, posture rigid, face lined with quiet shame. Madison Reyes wept softly into her sleeve. And then, at long last, the gavel dropped. The board of Rich Hill Financial Center, the chairwoman announced, her voice clear and formal, hereby acknowledges Samuel T. DeWitt as the original founder of Rich Hill Savings and Credit Union and recognizes that a historical and legal injustice was committed by those who succeeded him. We issue a formal apology and commit to restoring his name to all institutional records, public displays, and future communications. Applause broke out. Slowly at first, claps of disbelief and relief, and then thunderous, sustained applause that echoed against the marble and glass. Samuel stood still, eyes wet but proud, his chin slightly lifted as the recognition he had waited 50 years for finally arrived. And when the ceremony concluded, he didn't rush. He walked slowly through the crowd, past familiar faces now softened by remorse, through the same lobby that once laughed at him, toward the heavy brass doors that framed the sunlit street outside. A reporter rushed to catch him, mic in hand, voice breathless. "Mr. DeWitt, any final words after all this time?" Samuel stopped just before the threshold. He turned, the sunlight casting a gold halo around his worn coat and leather satchel. His voice was steady, unwavering. "They buried the truth for 50 years, he said, eyes sweeping over the room, the staff, the cameras, and the people who had finally chosen to listen. Today, the truth walked back through that door." And with that, Samuel DeWitt stepped outside into the Charleston morning. The crowd parted silently, like waves before a ship. People reached out to touch his shoulder. Some whispered thank you. Others wept. Raymond Hart followed close behind, shaking his hand, whispering words only the two of them could hear. And as the doors of Rich Hill Financial Center closed gently behind him, Samuel didn't look back. He didn't have to. The building had changed. The people inside had changed. History had changed. And he had written that change not with vengeance, but with truth. A truth that could no longer be buried. As the author of The Man They Tried to Forget, I want to take a moment to reflect on the deeper meaning behind Samuel DeWitt's journey and what it represents, not just for him, but for all of us. This story isn't just about a man reclaiming a bank. It's about reclaiming dignity. Reclaiming truth. Reclaiming a name that history tried to erase simply because it didn't fit the narrative built by the powerful. Samuel walked into Rich Hill not with anger or vengeance, but with undeniable truth and quiet resolve. And that's what made the difference. The lesson here is clear: never underestimate the power of perseverance, even when the world tells you to stay silent. Justice is not always swift. Recognition is not always given freely. But when we speak truth with courage and integrity, when we refuse to be erased, we plant seeds that one day bloom into undeniable change. For Samuel, it took 50 years. But truth doesn't have an expiration date. And neither does justice. We also learn something vital about our role as bystanders. Characters like Madison Reyes, Raymond Hart, and even Kyle Brennan show us that people can change. That it's never too late to listen, to acknowledge, to stand up. Each of us will be presented with moments in life where we must choose between comfort and conviction. Choose wisely. Because silence, too, has a cost. To everyone listening to this story on U.S. Daily Story, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to hear a voice that was once silenced. Thank you for believing in the importance of stories that challenge systems, question history, and honor resilience. If Samuel's story moved you, let it be a reminder to stay alert, to dig deeper, and to lift up those whose truths are long overdue. We're honored to share stories like this, stories of injustice turned into strength, of voices once ignored that now echo across generations. If you found meaning in this message, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going. And most importantly, thank you for being part of this community. Your attention, your empathy, and your courage to confront hard truths is what makes U.S. Daily Story more than just a channel. It makes it a movement. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth.